everybody. It's nice that everybody's coming and joining on this. We've got a very wet and rainy evening, so thank you. As Helen said, this is SALT Top Tips and Strategies for Older Learners with SEND. I am a speech language therapist. I've been working for 10 years in SEN schools. I've worked with children aged 11 to 19. I've also worked with a few younger, so sort of age 8 or 9. And I have worked with admissions. So I have helped children getting into schools and worked with the whole admissions department in different counties, looking at both sides, from the SEN school side as well as looking at the mainstream side, and then how to support children when they are in mainstream secondaries. One thing I did see a lot of is a lot of children who are maybe coming into year 7 who are working at a year 3 to year 4 level. So it's a whole key stage behind, and therefore the amount of support that needed to go in was huge, but not necessarily always available and not always possible. So it was kind of seeing how to balance and support teaching staff who are doing everything that they physically can to support the children and supporting the families, but also working with the boundaries of the admissions and all the complications that goes with that. So overview of the session, what we're going to look at today, we're going to look at what SEND is, the differences between looking at older learners and then younger learners, because I think a lot of the time the focus is on younger learners, and often our children in secondaries are kind of thought of second almost, or have similar resources and similar ways of teaching as you would younger learners. But actually there are a few differences, even if they are working at a younger level. There's going to be lots of tips, ideas, things that are very practical for you to use throughout. And then looking at how Twinkl can help. At the end, I'll leave sort of 5-10 minutes somewhere to hopefully answer any questions that you might have. Just type it into the chat and we'll have a look at the end. Thank you. Let's have a look. So SEND is special educational needs and disabilities. So I want to just have a think for a minute or two, or even that, a few seconds, and think about the huge list that you probably have seen. I know we'll have people who have family members who have people with SEND. We'll have teachers and teaching assistants and school staff, everybody who works with SEND. So just have a think about the long list. And I don't have a full exhaustive list, just put a few examples in for now. So we've got speech language communication needs, which is a huge, huge area, and a huge number of children with SEND have SLCN as well. Autistic spectrum condition, which is again another big area. We're getting more and more children being diagnosed with ASC as well as with SLCN, which is fantastic, which means they're getting more support, which is exactly what we want. ADHD, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, chromosome disorders, which is a huge area to cover, chromosome disorders, because they're very, very different. So that's why it's kind of under one bracket. Learning disabilities, specific learning difficulties, so things such as dyslexia, so that does come under the SEND bracket. Physical disabilities and sensory impairments, so hearing impairments, visual impairments, and multisensory impairments, where children may have both, and social, emotional, and mental health needs. So special educational needs and disabilities, it is a need that impacts a child's access to learning. That means it impacts them throughout the day, throughout their school day, throughout their home day, whether it's when they're in the summer holidays or not, it's impacting everything that they are able to learn. So whether that's part of a conversation, so their communication and their social interaction, or their writing, it could be their being able to read things, so reading what's up on the board when you're in class, or reading a sign when you're at a bus stop, and your emotional and mental health. And there is a lot more research and information going into the emotional mental health and how it's kind of going alongside a lot of the special educational needs. And here we go. So All of this information was on the government website. So they're saying at the moment it's 1.6 million children have SEND. So it's quite a big increase from 2003, 11.6. That is possibly an underestimate. There have been other reports since where teachers are reporting and they think the number could be more at sort of 1.9 million. But these are on the government website, it would be children who have an EHCP or are going through the EHC process. The most common type of need for those with an EHCP plan is autistic spectrum condition, and for those with SEN support is speech and language communication needs. Sorry, I just realised I wrote this order, but it's autistic spectrum condition. And the Pearson report. So Pearson is an assessment and exam company. I'm sure a lot of people, if you're working with older learners and you work in secondaries, you have seen Pearson resources, you've seen Pearson exam. So they have done a big report, which I've included the link here, so that when you get the PowerPoint, you can then have a look as well. And in that, they've said 83% of educators believe that students with SEND or additional needs are not being effectively supported in their aspirations and achievement by the current education system, which I think everybody can agree is a huge amount of children who then aren't getting their needs met, aren't getting their next steps met as well. So it's not just looking at their current needs, but looking at what they would like to do in the future. And I think secondary is such a springboard for, let's have a look at what we're doing. And you're doing your GCSEs and you're doing your A-levels or you're doing your BTECs or whatever exam boards you're doing or whatever you're looking at, what support are we going to give you to get onto the next step in life? And there's such a push into working life and everything. If 83% of children with SEND aren't getting supported in that, that means 83% of children who may not be able to reach those next steps or who are going to need a very different support package in order to reach those needs, and they may never get that, which is, I think, quite a huge number for a lot of children. 44% say supporting pupils with SEND is one of the biggest challenges in school. I would imagine that a lot of people would agree, because it can be quite a big challenge, and I think a lot of the challenge isn't to do with what to support, it's more to do with the how to support. When you've got a huge number of children in your class, when you've got a huge number of children in a school with SEND, it's how do you best support them with everything. And you want to individualize that support for children, because a lot of the time children need that individualized, and there's just no time to do it, and there's no funding to be able to support all of the children, unfortunately. And then 61% said that prevalence of SEND is a growing challenge in schools, which I think a lot of people will agree with. So differences between younger and older learners. I just wanted to quickly go over this because I think it's very easy to bring younger learner concepts across to older learners, but actually it doesn't always work. For some children, it definitely does. And this is where it's that individualized approach for children. But so for younger learners, you'll often see it play-based. So SALT will come in and you've probably seen in primary schools, and we bring in a truck of toys essentially, and every game under the sun. If you go into a mainstream school and if I brought in a bunch of board games, then they would look at me like, what on earth are you doing? Some kids would love it because they think it's a chance to get out of class and just play a game with somebody. But actually, a lot of the time, it isn't appropriate for a lot of the older learners, depending on their individual needs as well. A lot of it's younger images or concepts. It's much simpler language. Again, the simpler language is great because a lot of our children with SEND need the simpler language, but equally, they need the language to appear older almost. So they want it to look like it's aimed at them and not aimed at younger children. And it's different skills. So, for example, social skills are often very different. So there's often a push on turn taking or listening in primary schools. And those are hugely important, but actually older learners, you do it in a very different way when you're teaching or supporting with turn taking. You're not going to play a game of Snap or something to show children how to take turns. You're not going to use a ball to show it's that person's turn to talk. you have to use very different ways of supporting older learners. And I think that's where sometimes that can get a little bit missed. So for example, some resources that we've got at Twinkl, so we've got some conversation starters. This is a Key Stage 1 example down at the bottom. And it's very simple. What's your favorite animal, favorite color, favorite shop? Simple illustrations and simple words. And then you go to slightly older learners, so Key Stage 2, so where they're still wanting to be a little bit older, but they're not quite old enough to maybe understand higher concepts. So it's a favorite sport to play, what does love mean to you, what responsibilities do you have, things like that. And then Key Stage 3. The Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 ones are the same, but the images are different. So what qualities do you look for a friend? We've got here. And then what qualities do you look for in a friend? So it's just making the illustrations, making the backgrounds, making everything look a little bit different. And I think that's something that can be presented in so many different ways. It can be presented in a whole class setting. It can be presented on a worksheet. So it's, instead of giving a child in Key Stage 3 this resource for a conversation starter, you could give them something more like this. And looking at the Key Stage 3, the favourite sport to play is not a complex question to ask, even if somebody at a Key Stage 3 working in Year 8 may only be working at a Key Stage 2 level. It's not that big a jump concepts-wise. Right, so a few more differences. So making it look age appropriate. Again, like we were just saying, it's a lot of the children in Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 might be working at a Key Stage 2 level. So how do you make that look older? So that's where it's about adapting the resources. But equally, I completely understand it's easy for me to say, just adapt resources. The reality is, in a school, there's not always time to sit and adapt every single resource, especially in mainstream secondary, where you've got 6 lessons a day, maybe 8 lessons a day, depending on the school, and it's adapting resource for every child with SEND in your class for every lesson. It just can't happen. But it's about maybe using those banks of resources that you'd have. The social stigma of additional support. A lot of children, so I've gone into a lot of mainstream schools, and the teaching assistants or the teachers will say to me, they're supposed to have one-to-one throughout the day, and this child refuses to have one-to-one throughout the day. And I've seen some really good imaginative ways that teachers have come up with that. So sort of using their one-to-one who's supposed to be with them, but actually they set them up, then they go off and they do I had one teacher say they do a job, and it's not a job, it's sort of doing what looks different to supporting the other children, because again, that isn't their responsibility if they're there to support one child, but they go off and they sort of grab some files and then they go back. So they're not constantly velcroed to the child, which a lot of children initially can struggle with in the transition from Year 6 to Year 7. In Year 6, in a lot of primary mainstreams, it's amazing because they can have an LSA with them all the time, the teaching assistant with them all the time, and that's a fantastic thing. However, you get into Year 7 and it's that change over the summer holidays. They suddenly don't want somebody with them the whole time, potentially, but also none of their peers have somebody, and it's seen as so different, and children will pick up on it. So it's kind of how different ways of trying to support in that. There's also adapting the social emotional learning to focus on what's important to them. So asking a person in a shop to find an item. I spoke to one young boy, he was in Year 9, and he said, oh, I come out and I do a lesson. Instead of doing French, I come out to do some additional English support with my support, and it's great. But we keep doing these random sheets on how to talk to people. And I was like, okay, why is that a bad thing? And he said, but I can talk to people, I'm talking to you. And then he went off and chatted about something completely off topic for ages. It was lovely because I was just having a nice chat, but he couldn't see that actually he did need the support, but it was how to then help him with it. He said, oh, I keep just sitting, we do a worksheet and another worksheet, but I don't want to learn that. And it was actually, nobody had explained why it was important to him. So he hadn't had a SALT explain it to him. He hadn't had any of the teaching staff explain it to him, to say, you do need to talk to people, but there's certain ways, potentially. It's how you approach somebody when you're out, to ask for help, to ask for directions, to pay for something in the shop. You can't just talk about the thing that's in your head at the moment because you're interested in it. And sort of breaking it down a little bit for him, he could kind of see it. But then bless him, it was a 20-minute conversation. I couldn't spend all day, but he was sort of nodding away, thinking, yeah, okay. But and then talked about his interest again and said, what I really want to do is I want to go to the train station and talk to the train, what are they called, the conductors and the people in the stuff, and I want to talk to them. And I said, that's wonderful, but you can't spend all day. And he couldn't understand why he couldn't spend all day. And it just hadn't been broken down. So it's working on those more secondary skills than on those primary based skills. So it's not just you have to take turns. He knew he had to take turns. He just struggled to, but he didn't understand why he couldn't just talk to somebody and about his interests. There's also a lot of expectations of being able to do things themselves. I think the jump up from primary, where there's so much support put in and children are prompted for every single step throughout the day, which is right, and they should be, because they need that support. And they go into secondary and they go in for registration. They're told, have you got all your stuff? Right, these are your first lessons. We'll kind of show you for the first day or so, but otherwise, good luck. And the kids just sit there going, well, I can't remember what you said because I just zoned out, and because it was just too much language. I have no idea any of it, just sat there. And I think that can be a big step up. So it's kind of managing the expectations for all of the staff as well, of just actually they do still need that little bit of help. And I think schools in general, and so many schools know that that is what they need. Again, it's just the time constraints, and it's kind of being able to put that into place. There is also growing, so from sort of the end of Key Stage 2 up to Key Stage 3, a lot of children are beginning to become more aware of their difficulties and noticing those differences between their peers and themselves, which then impacts on their social and emotional health and their self-esteem. And sometimes that can become more of their primary issue. We may not see it as their primary issue, but they see it as their primary issue, that they are anxious, they are upset, that they can't do what their peers can do. And it's very easy for us to say, well, we'll put all of this in place to help you do that. Actually, it's what do they also want to be put in place, and how can we support them through that transition and that change? And under kind of understanding that it needs to be supported a little bit more, and that their emotional and social understanding develops and will change, but that actually their social and emotional development may also be a little bit further behind. So they may still be at sort of a Key Stage 2 and getting a bit more upset more easily. And that is okay. And it's how do we then support and what's in place? And so many schools that I've seen are putting in so much. It's incredible. And I think a lot of people are getting more and more understanding of the social and emotional needs that children are having. So one thing that comes up a lot is children's understanding levels. So Blank's level, Blanks was created back in the 1970s by Dr. Marion Blank, who was a developmental psychologist, and she came up with a link between comprehension and reasoning. So we've got the different levels. We've got level 1 all the way up to level 4. Level 1, and I'm sure a lot of you listening to this know this and have used Blank's level throughout, but for anybody who hasn't, so level 1 is your most concrete. It's the most obvious. So when you point, if I point to the computer and I say, well, what is this? The children can say, it's a computer. Right up to level 4, if I ask somebody to explain, how do you know that that's a computer? What are the, that's using more reasoning skills. It's making more understanding of what it is that creates a computer. So is it a computer because it has a keyboard, because it has a screen, because it has a hard drive, whatever it is? Like, can children use that because it isn't as concrete to explain? Always consider the type of question being asked. So a lot of the time, as you get further up in education, so we start off in Key Stage 1, and Key Stage 1 children are often working at a level 1, level 2. Occasionally we'll go up to a level 3, and that's sort of inferencing and reasoning. What would happen if you forgot to bring your wellies and you splashed in a puddle? That kind of thing at level 3, level 4 for Key Stage 1. But we go all the way up through to Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4, and you go into a history lesson, and you say, well, what could have happened if? And it's using historical knowledge as well as new language, and it's all intertwined, and children sit there looking blankly at a board, and we go, oh, why didn't you understand that? We've got all the prompts. And you think they just didn't understand the question. It's not that you didn't have the resources, it's that you said, oh, what could happen next if this all happened, instead of bringing it down a little bit and sort of describing. So you describe the situation first and then going into what would be next. You look at your prompts, kind of thing. On Twinkl, we've got loads of blanks levels for older learners, so you can help practice and go through it. So a few tips. Some of this might be repeated from earlier, but it's just then having it all condensed into one space. So having it play-based, play isn't always appropriate. However, saying that, I've worked in an SEN school in which I used football, I've used cricket, I have used Uno, I have used just about every game and everything under the sun in order to teach. And it's because that is their preferred way of learning still, because that socially, developmentally, is where they may still be at. So it could be, actually, we're going to play a combination of games, but we are going to play them in a way that children kind of can take part of it more. In that, so for example, I used football in a class. I had a class of 8 children, and 6 of the 8 of them were football crazy, and I learned so much about football. It was wonderful. But we used that in order to teach presentation skills and to teach theory of mind, so that they understood that not everybody in the class knew everything that they knew about football or about their specific team or about their favourite player, because they could not understand why I had never watched some of the matches that they would talk about, and they would just look at me blankly. So we spent, I think it was 8 weeks, so it was sort of in half a term, working on how do you create a presentation. So using reading and writing skills, they had to find information on the internet, they had to use all of their own resources. And then at the end of it, I had one child who then said, right, miss, at the end of it, I'm going to take everybody out and teach them how to do this skill. And I was like, that is exactly the point. So he then showed the presentation, presented it all, and then he became a teacher and took us all outside, and we had a game of football, and he showed some skills and he got the footballs out, and it was all organised. But if I said to him, I'd like you to write a presentation, I'd like you to write a presentation about baking cakes, something that he's not interested in, there would have been no point. He would have looked at me blankly. He would not have been interested in researching any of it, but also he wouldn't have learnt the new language that he learnt whilst doing it. It meant that he was able to go from maybe writing 1 or 2 words to writing a short sentence, because he was more interested in it, because he could understand more of the words, because he'd heard them used so much when he was watching football, talking about football with his friends, playing football. It was a great lesson. All of their lessons were amazing. They all had to teach new skills to peers in the class based on whatever their hobby was. So we had a model train set come out. I learned how to do keepy uppies. So for me, it was very interesting. I've had a range of different things happen, and we made paper aeroplanes as well, made the best paper aeroplanes. So it was a huge range, but it was great fun. Play does look different if older learners, and it could be that you do bring in a game for older learners. So although they're working in year 9, if socially and emotionally and academically they are maybe at a year 4 level or a year 5 level, they may actually really enjoy the game, and that is okay. It's just finding a game that works. So if they want to use snakes and ladders in order to practice taking turns, then that's fantastic. It's kind of making sure that the game works. But equally, it could be having no play. I have worked in an SEN school in which none of the children wanted to play in a certain class, and just adapting that. So whether that's working on one-to-one activities and just sitting and doing the worksheets, which is what they wanted to do, because they said, that's how I want to learn. I don't need a game, whether that's to use it at the end of a session or to use it throughout the session. They didn't want that. They just wanted to work on the actual target. I've also done Lego-based therapy, where a child, it took me a few weeks to work out why they didn't want to take part and they kept leaving my lesson. And Lego-based therapy is one of those things that you just presume kids will enjoy, especially a class that was often boys. You kind of think, right, everybody come and play. I mean, I love Lego, so I was kind of like, why does everybody want to play Lego with me? I've got all the really cool sets. And this boy just kept leaving my class. And in the end, it turned out he was like, but we're just playing. Why are we playing? We're supposed to be in class. And in the end, I said, okay, right, then what I want to do is change your job, because instead of using one of the 3 jobs that you have in Lego-based therapy, is could you come in, or could you do the job like the other speech and language therapist in the class is doing, and can you support? And actually it helped him he almost took turns in every role, but it also meant he massively saw that he needed to support the language, and that he couldn't just bring the language out. He was using all the resource boards that we had. He was using everything, and that was amazing. And at the end of it, it was really nice to see his improvement, but also to see that he could kind of take part in an activity without it being too much of a play-based activity for him. But also for secondary age children, it could be more conversational and more natural rather than a traditional worksheet-based support. So it could be just having a session where instead of looking at their targets, they just need to have a chat about something that's going on. And actually, sometimes when you get to the root of that problem, it can help build that rapport a bit more and then develop a bit more towards their targets and what they need. So a few more. A really hard one, but one that I wish in a perfect ideal world we could do, is adapt all of the rules. And I know that that's impossible. Realistically, I know it is, but as much as possible, if we can adapt the rules. I have seen too many children be on report cards, or I can't remember, there are lots of different names, but sort of those things for what I would class as a simple rule. Now, I understand that you have to have a blanket rule for a school, because otherwise, in a school that has thousands of pupils, if you say, no, actually, it doesn't really matter if you wear trainers or not, it can turn to a bit of anarchy. all of the kids will decide they'll come in wearing trainers. And all of the rules will start to be bent slowly. But if you think in a workplace, we make adaptations for adults who may have SEND, who may have any additional needs, why do we not always accommodate those rules for children in a secondary school? So, for example, if you have a child with dyspraxia, they may find it more difficult to organise themselves. I've had children who did have dyspraxia and they would be on report cards for just not bringing in their equipment every day. And actually, for some of them, it was the parents were putting the equipment in the bag for them, the children were forgetting to take it out, and then they were being put on to report cards. They were having sanctions put against them because they kept forgetting in every lesson. This is where it's then tricky, because the teachers don't have time to go, well, can you check in your bag? Can you make sure you've got it? Can you take it out and show me? They can't do that for every child, and we understand that. But it's about, where do you put those strategies? So could you put something in the classroom, on the board at the beginning of the day, in big letters, sort of maths equipment, and then just as a prompt, everybody, don't forget you have to have your pencil case out of the lesson. Make sure you've got your calculator out, whatever it is that you need for that lesson, those little prompts, because those are prompts that children go from in primary school, and they have them all. They have the bunch of prompts, they have the one-to-one telling them, don't forget this, make sure you've got this. And then they go into secondary and they have to get around the class, get around all the classrooms, organize their own things, be able to understand the lessons. There's just so much more, and they don't have the one-to-one support with them. And even if they do, they are also growing up, and so they do need to have a little bit of independence. So it's finding that balance. But equally, it's individualizing that balance for each child, which again, I know isn't necessarily possible for everybody to do in every school. And I know, talking to all the teachers and LSAs that I've spoken to in various mainstream secondaries, they would love to be able to put in all of those strategies, but actually chatting to a couple of Senkos even and just saying, well, why does the child need to be on a report card for always forgetting a pencil case? And they're like, oh, well, they don't. You're like, yeah. Yeah, like for the other things they may have done, maybe, but for not remembering a pencil case, can there just be a pot of pens in the office that they can grab, and then, or you can hand to them and say, don't forget, here's your pen, and you've got it for the day. It's a small adaptation, but it could make a huge difference to a child and massively reduce their anxiety as well. Also asking the student, I'm sure everybody's seen some EHCPs where you look at it and the all about me part with the students, you kind of go, I don't know if you wrote that or if you've even ever seen it. And I've shown students and they've gone, I don't know what this is. And they've looked in completely blankly and said, I definitely didn't get involved. Now, I'm fully aware that also children will forget, because by the time you get an EHCP sometimes, and when you've actually done the report for it, can sometimes be over a year. So equally, I understand that kids will go, no, I don't remember doing that. But a lot of the time, we do need to try and get their input in as much as possible, and as much in their voice as possible. If that child says that they don't want to have that they do, that they do want a close one-to-one in class, then how do we do that, and how does that pupil see it happening in each class? Do they want to come out of class for catch-up lessons? Do they want to come out for SALT and for OT? I've had students say they don't want to do SALT anymore. I don't just take their word for it the first time they say it, because we all did. A lot of the kids just wouldn't do a lot of the lessons. But if they said it enough times and they've given me reasons, then I will say, you can then stop it for now, but let's review this in 2 or 3 weeks' time and see what you need, because actually you are getting something from it, you are progressing. But I understand that you also don't want to come out of class. You don't want to look different from your peers. You don't want to be missing out on a lesson that you may enjoy. So let's swap the lessons around. Do they actually understand the impact if they don't come out? So if they don't come out for the extra English lessons or the extra maths lessons, do they understand that in a year's time, that could impact them and they may not have made that progress? Yeah, so normalising adjustments in the classroom. Like I said before, so if we expect adjustments in work life, why isn't that given to our students? If we can just adapt a worksheet slightly, can we do this at the start and not during a lesson? Again, I know there's time constraints. I know there's staffing constraints. There's just not enough staff a lot of the time for the children with SEND, and I completely understand that. But it's how can we best support and make those adjustments? I think at times it's very hard to make those adjustments as you're going along, and actually that can lead to more issues. So for example, if a student needs sensory support, can they have a fidget tool to help them? Can they have the sensory input? Can they leave class 5 minutes early in order to kind of walk through a hallway where it's a little quieter, or to go and have a sensory break somewhere that is a safe place for them? And just how can we best support? Like I was saying, so the organisation is always a big change. Visuals and auditory support and prompts. It's very easy for me to just say, put in visuals, but it's actually about what visuals you put in and how they're put in. because I think we all know to put in visuals. Everybody knows that a lot of our SEND children do need the visual and auditory prompts, but it's how do we do that? So, for example, writing on the board, PE tomorrow, and that prompt says that they are all leaving. Remember, it's PE tomorrow, and then almost singling out that child. We try not to single them out, but extra prompting them. Things like a class calendar, where bigger events can be highlighted, so where you've got a class trip and that be highlighted, when certain homework needs to be brought in. So if maths homework is every Friday, can it be every Friday and written on there so that they know? And things like the emergency pen pot. So can they bring it at the beginning of the day, bring it back at the end? Like little things like that hopefully can make quite a big difference. So visual support and how it changes from primary to secondary. A lot of the secondary visual support is written, and that is to make it look more age appropriate, because when you've got a picture of every visual, it can look very young. However, writing everything isn't always the most helpful, when literacy is often impacted by the SEND. So it could be just having one image. It doesn't have to be hundreds of images. And it's also about thinking about the type of image, so making the image look a bit older. So maybe using a photograph rather than a cartoon image. I know I've used a cartoon image here, but I quite liked it. So, and also thinking about our visual space around us. Some children with sensory processing needs, the actual classrooms can be too visually stimulating for them, and makes it harder for them to then focus in on just the whiteboard. Equally, I do know that we have to have displays up because that is part of being in education, and part of what we have. And often the visuals help a lot of other children in the class. So I'm not saying make it a blank classroom with just a whiteboard. It's, does every single thing need to be up there? Does it need to have 30 pieces of work on every single board to show every child's work? It's how do we change that? So quick example is having a look at this classroom. You've got the whiteboard, and then we've got posters, all with loads of words. Then you've got this lovely notice board with notices upside down and sideways, big, small, all over the place. And then more visuals where it's numbers, but it's also just very small written writing. Very small writing. So it's just a lot for some children to process in all of this when they're supposed to be looking at this part. Because yes, this image isn't great because my eye is drawn to these because it's more the center of the page. But if you were in a class, are you going to look at the list of words that are on this page, or are you going to look at the nice bright colors that might be here? Or are they just going to be too distracting? You've got this bright orange border. A border is great, it doesn't need to be a really bright color. So it's just thinking about little ways how things can be improved to support children to maybe focus in a bit more on what they're supposed to be learning. Because so often we walk into a classroom and the children are looking around and you think, this is great, but actually you're just daydreaming and looking around at all the other things in the classroom and you haven't looked once at the whiteboard. And we all do it. I've done it. I've gone into a class and thought, oh, I haven't actually paid attention to what the teacher is teaching at the front of the class because there was a really nice display. And then things like this. So when you have a board, and this happens a lot in secondary schools, and I've been in the classrooms, and this comes up, and you think, oh, lovely, they're learning about Dracula, and we can kind of pick out some of the key parts. Actually, a lot of children will just shut down because there's just too much writing in there. So instead of having it like that, oh, my arrows are all over the place, cutting it down. So this is exactly the same part. It's just copied and pasted across, but you've got an image, you've got an extra image to show exactly what a journal is. You're breaking up the chunks. So instead of having a huge amount of writing on one slide, can you break it up a little bit? and then highlighting some of the keywords as well. So then children, when they need to go back and they're doing their piece of writing on it, they're answering questions, can find things. Equally, I understand from a teaching point, if you're trying to teach comprehension, highlighting essentially the answers isn't necessarily the best thing to have done. But if it's appropriate to your lesson, if your lesson is about maybe writing your own journal article, journal entry, then having some of the keywords isn't going to massively impact what they then create as well. Auditory, so a lot of the time kids have a lot more auditory, like we said, and it's a bit more complex, so that's kind of thinking back to the blanks. Big tip, pause between instructions for our SEND students. At least 5 seconds. Some students can have 10 to 15 seconds processing. I have worked with students who have 30 seconds processing time between each sentence, and that's lovely, but it's very long. It feels like you have waited for ages. So if you just pause now, and if I pause now for 5 seconds, actually it is a long time. So if we just 5 seconds, we say something is 5 seconds and we think it's really short, but when you're trying to talk, 5 seconds can feel like a really long time, but it just means that children have that little bit of time to catch up. Then we've got the social skills. So this is a really, really broad area. I can't go into every single part of it, but it could be as simple as supporting children getting into the lessons, or navigating friendships in class and in break times, things like that. So it's finding those little things that may not feel little to the children and how to best support and adapt it throughout the day. So my main tips are individualized support where you can. I do understand there are time constraints, but individualize where you can. Give opportunities in lessons for structured social interactions. So children are struggling to interact with each other, but actually it's because they might need a little bit of structure to know how to. And how to navigate social situations with the support of an adult. Giving pupils with SEND an opportunity to be heard. So this could be verbally, but it could be being aware of other communication styles. So I worked with a child who had a communication aid, and he came from a mainstream school, and he just hid his communication aid away. And it was because he couldn't use the interactive AAC on it as well as he maybe wanted to in order to keep up with all of the kids. Because verbally conversation can go very quickly, but on a device it can be a bit slower. So it's about kind of balancing that. And then, is there other times in the day that are impacting students? Attention listening, so keeping it short, keeping it clear, using pictures and videos, breaking up information, making sure students are focused as much as they can, giving them movement breaks. And a movement break could be really simple. It could be, oh, we need this book, could you go and grab it? That is a movement break. So they walk across the classroom and they come back. Equally, you don't do that for the child who then goes across and just interrupts every other child working, but that could be their movement break. It doesn't have to be that they go into a different class and they have to go and do a big movement. Changing up learning styles. Most teachers do this naturally anyway, but as you get into secondary and a little bit more into kind of key stage 4, you can have a lesson where you're just sitting and you're writing, because that is what you need to do in order to get the BTECs and to get the GCSEs. However, for those slightly younger learners, it's kind of using maybe paired and independent learning as well as the teacher-led learning, and kind of some movements. So kind of if you get paired, it just means they're moving their chairs around, and that little bit of movement can just break it up a little bit, and then giving time to process as well. Oh, it's going across. There we go. Salt. A big thing is salt isn't just isn't just in the classroom. It is all day. So a lot of the time we know that children have maybe social interaction difficulties, conversational difficulties, they have social and emotional health difficulties. The focus is so much on their learning, especially in the HCPs, that it can then be forgotten about. during the rest of the day. And it's also it's those changes. So getting to and from school, things that happen at the weekend can then have a huge impact on children throughout their day in school and throughout their week. And something that may not seem like a sort of big thing to us may be very big to them. So it could be they played FIFA the night before, they lost a few games, they're really upset, they come to school, they're still thinking about it, they're still really upset, they don't tell anybody. Having those rapports, which so many staff do, having those rapports can then help, because then it brings in the learning afterwards. So then it supports their speech and language as well. What was it going to change? But again, I'm preparing for the future. So a lot of children in secondary school, their priorities and their wants and needs will change. The child I mentioned before who had an AAC device, he said he wanted, he would list his career aspirations, and they were huge and they were amazing, but they weren't necessarily the most achievable for him at that point, because he wasn't using his device. He had speech sound difficulties, which is why he had the device, but he was then completely unintelligible a lot of the time without it. Or I would have a lot of teaching assistants ask me, is he selectively mute? Because he just wouldn't talk throughout lessons. And it was because he didn't feel comfortable using his device and he didn't feel comfortable talking to people. And actually, it then meant, instead of working specifically on the speech sounds, it was how do we then work on other things, and how do we work on your communication as a whole, because that's more important. You need to be able to ask for help in a classroom. You do not need to be able to make this sound at the beginning of a word because you are 15, and we need to get you out just getting comfortable with writing and asking for support. I'm going to just quickly go through these. So being neuroaffirming, breaking down your information as your practical tips, your seating, check your understanding. A lot of the time the children say, yes, they definitely understood, and you think, no, you didn't. So it's maybe finding, a different way of checking their understanding. So asking questions to class, choosing another student to explain it in a different way. Thinking about the language and curriculum specific language as well. So pre-teaching where you can. So a few practical tips, things like word mats, things like visuals on a timetable. This is a way of teaching vocabulary that I was shown, and it's called walking the word. So you might have the word in the middle called walk, and you would put it into a sentence, say the first letter, similar words, opposites, drawing it. It's a huge way of creating those semantic links for children to learn new vocabulary. So a great way of pre-teaching new vocabulary in subject-specific language as well. Got a few tips for how we can support you with Twinkl. So we've got the older learners page, which has a wealth of resources. I've got all the links in here as well. When you click on Twinkl, there is a whole inclusion part that has loads of bits on it, loads and loads of resources, all created by incredible people who have wealth of knowledge. So we've got SALT resources all here, but we've also got, if I go back within it, we've also got there's OT, there's social emotional support throughout it, so things that all intertwine. There's colourful semantics resources here as well. I won't click on all the links because I want to give time for everyone to, if there are any questions at the end. We've got some free taster bundle packs for older learners, so things like this. So this is a reflection time, emotional learning one, with loads of little different parts in it. Twinkl also does lots of partnerships, and for older learners we've got things like Sonic, Spider-Man, great things, and it's linked in. So we've got like a Sonic barrier game, we've got a listen in colour or a read in colour for Spider-Man, and then We've got conversation games, which I was showing you earlier. We've got older learner colourful semantics, social scripts, so things like making a phone call. So when you just want those resources quick to hand to be able to kind of start off a session or a lesson, these kind of things are massively helpful. And I've used them. I'm saying this as I'm from Twinkl, but I've actually used them as well in my own lessons, in my own teaching. We've got things like SEN classroom friendly checklist. Is your checklist, is your classroom SEN friendly? Which is a great one. We've got adulthood outcomes and things like the classroom. Is it a classroom friendly environment?